It's really important to remind us, Kevin, if you're done, that water is ongoing, it's just going in the right direction, you know. So I'd now like to hand the floor over to James. So James is an activist of long standing, he's been involved in many campaigns in Cork. He's also a bookseller, and he's also has been a career as a zinester back in the day, producing Rebel City, which I used to call the Ireland zone of the left. But, because he always published ballads, remember that, James? Yeah. So anyway, he's gonna speak to this topic as well. So about 10 minutes as well.
That's all. Okay. I won't speak more. I stand up when I speak, and that's just a habit from my early political training. I was in the debating society in school, and we were encouraged to stand when we were seeking to project ourselves. Also, I'm mathematics, so it helps me get the air into my lungs. So, thank you, Kevin. You gave a great introduction in terms of the context. Context is very important in this. I'm going to want a small bit of context myself, and I'm going to move on to talking about organising in working class communities, and about the great example that Kevin referenced was the water tax campaign, and then some of the issues that come up in that sort of organising. So we're at a kind of low ebb, and Kevin touched there on workplace organising, and probably in our lives, certainly in my life, we're probably at the lowest ebb in terms of workplace organising ever. And there's lots of reasons for that, and it comes out of the context that we find ourselves in today. Probably at this point in human history, and it's an international thing, is we're seeing the greatest transfer of wealth to the wealthiest elements, and Kevin referenced that small clique of people that own vast amounts of wealth in all our lifetimes and generations. Probably since the end of the Second World War, when the welfare state was set up as a SOP to keep the working class in line for fear of the big threat in the East at the time, the communist thing. Whatever criticisms we have of that regime. And what's happened is that welfare period, that period where they felt they needed to bribe us as a class, is over, basically. I know they're grabbing as much as they can. And I'm going to reference 4 economists who I watch on YouTube, and it's because it's always useful for people to understand a bit of economics. Professor Steve Keane, Richard J. Murphy, Richard D. Wolfe, and Gary's Economics. Gary is actually a working class guy who made a lot of money in the stock exchange, and some of you will be familiar with him. But they're very good on that. That's him, because they're all people who've lived their lives and studied capitalism, but who are not mainstream economists and have watched that transfer of wealth occurring. They describe it very well, how it's done. And the product of that has been in this generation, this country, very, very visibly, that if you're my age, you probably, if you were lucky enough to have worked during the 80s and 90s, which not everyone did, you probably were able to buy a house. And now your children haven't any prospect of it. And if they're renting, they're just about able to afford the rent if they're working, and accommodation is really substandard, generally. We have 17,000 people living in homeless accommodation in this country, which is, we would say, is a national disgrace, but is a product of the fact that the neoliberal agenda, which was this recent wave of capitalism, has destroyed the idea of housing as a social need and created it as a financial asset. And the capitalist class have taken everything. They attempted to make water an asset in this country. They succeeded in making so many other things an asset, and housing has become one of those. So everything now is driven to making us pay for accommodation, to us pay for everything over and over again, to the level where we're barely functioning. And part of that process has been people who are self-employed or run their own businesses in a small scale are being what they call proletarianized. Basically, they're being forced into the job market, that their business are becoming unviable because the overheads are becoming so much. And there was an element of that about the recent fuel tax protest, but we're not going to get into fuel tax protests because I know there are divisions over that. And we're talking specifically here about our class, the working class. And just for a quick definition there, because Rosie touched on that, look, if you have to sell your labour to make your living, you're part of the working class. That's your relation to the means of production. You're selling your labour. And everybody here more or less sells their labour, and all those who depend on you, you know, your children or maybe your elderly parents or something, they're all part of the working class. They're dependent on that wage coming through the door. And that's the vast majority of people, not just here in Ireland, but internationally. You sell your labour, and that's how you make your living. And for a long time, there was a way of cushioning it a bit, you know, because you might own your own house, so you didn't have to be paying rent, or you might have a land, but all that's disappearing as the wealth is being sucked into the into the capitalist class over time. And So in this context, a lot of us feel kind of powerless as individuals. And because the experience of union organising and organising in communities and stuff was largely destroyed in this country through the partnership process, where the unions did a central deal with government, and inevitably that led to tapering off of struggle in workplaces. A lot of experience in struggle, a lot of experience in organising workplaces was lost simply from lack of practice. So the skills couldn't be passed on. So when a union goes into organise a workplace now with younger workers, most of them haven't heard of a union before or have no experience of a union, or their experience of a union might be quite negative in the sense that it was almost seen as a collaborating group with the employer at various points in time. So one of the first things we have to do as a movement, and it's a slow and it's a hard process, is rebuilding the workers' movement. Almost reconstituting, I think, Paul, you came up with that term, reconstituting the working class movement, rebuilding within workplaces, recreating union organising, and then reclaiming the unions that are there where it's possible at all to democratise them and make them responsive to the needs of their membership. That's a long, hard process. I'm not saying any easy answers here. That's a long, hard process. But where we have made breakthroughs in the recent past, and Kevin referenced it, was the water tax campaign. Because in community organising, we have an area where there aren't as many institutions that can stop you organising. And the big strength of the water tax movement, and it was a very diverse movement in terms of its structures and its elements, was that working class community organising. Now, it was a multi-layered movement, and don't for 1 minute think that it was just simply a bunch of people got together and they organised it. There were different elements to it. There was the trade union element to it, who organised big demonstrations and marches. There was a political movement around it, who, as Kevin said, wanted to direct a particular thing to get people elected and stuff. But then within working class communities, there was a huge direct action movement. And that was an extremely democratic and organic and locally organised movement. And that movement basically denied the water company access to their communities and the ability to put in meters. And that inevitably led to a confrontational situation, which people in the poorest communities in this city led, first of all, but it was essentially a working class movement. And a lot of the people who would advocate other approaches were reluctant to get involved at the start. It's just a fact that people sneered at that tactic and that idea. But once it started rolling, it was an impossible thing to stop. It became the de facto method of struggle of that movement. It was organic from the working class. And the people who spread that throughout this country, through their communication, through personal relationships, through political relationships, were the heroes of that movement, because it made it inevitable the defeat of the government and the defeat of the state. It was a huge victory for the working class in this country, and it's no wonder you read very, very little about it lately. You know, this is about 10 years ago this happened. Where do you read about this, like a major movement in Irish history? I had a look the other night at the Wikipedia entries. Lads, we need to go and start with the Wikipedia entries. They are fucking abysmal. They deny the history of it isn't in it at all. And I would appeal here to actors who are good techie or whatever to go in there and let's just take it apart and rebuild those Wikipedia pages. They're a shame and a disgrace, because they've written out that part of the struggle, is completely written out of the record. And if people are looking for that record, one of the great things about the left and having left-wing political organisations, I'm going to come back to that, is that they were a memory for the class. So when you went looking for information, it was there, it was presented to you. I remember reading a great pamphlet when I was a young fella, and it was about the water tax campaign by Comrades of the Workers' Solidarity Movement. And it was about the struggle against the water tax and all the methods they used to organise and saying, whether you agreed with their political perspective or not, they were so spot on, and they were exact same methods that were used the next time round. But find the fucking pamphlet, it was hard enough to come by. There's no reason why we can't do that stuff online. It should be on the Wikipedia page, the whole lot of it, so that when young activists are looking for ideas, they'll find them there. And I'll come back to the direct action thing. So I think the key things for me in the water tax campaign were solidarity, direct action, and direct democracy. And these are the great strengths of that grassroots movement. So working class solidarity is something that it has to be core to our organisation. That when workers are in struggle, we offer them our solidarity. And just a quick shout out for Dahi O'Caran, you know about him, in jail in Limerick for allegedly attacking a plane at Shannon Airport. But there's a letter writing campaign aside. Sign up for that throw a few letters into the guy. That's part of the solidarity campaign, but also was the direct action. So people taking power into their own hands, not giving it to somebody to go up to the Dáil or to the council and make the arguments for people doing it for themselves. And this was the strength, because I remember below in Mahon, when this started happening, it was Cork and Ballyfan that came. There's a few Mahon people there today. We won't have, I won't draw attention to them, we embarrass them. But we knocked on every door in Mahon and we asked people, number one, don't pay the water charges. Number two, when the meters come in, we're going to resist them, support this campaign. And there was a telephone network and there were people ready. And the day that Irish Water came in, because we had patrols around the area, people getting up before work at 6 o'clock and 5 and 6:30 in the morning and sitting in vans in the bitter fucking cold, waiting for Irish Water vans to come in, and then the phone tree be out and people descending upon the vans and blocking them out. And as soon as people had dropped their kids to school, they'd fall in and people had to go to work, went to work. So it didn't actually interrupt people's work day, which was incredible. But that was the level of organisation. And that's the level of organisation we are capable of doing, again, around other issues. Now, there's nothing as huge as the water tax thing going to come at us in the near term. Obviously, the housing issue is probably the biggest thing. So what we need to do as activists is find the issues in our community that are the ones where you can mobilise and organise people around. So people get the experience of that level of solidarity and empowerment and direct democracy and direct action. All the meetings to organise that stuff in Mahon were held out in the open on the greens outside the houses. So people literally had to walk out their front door and talk to their neighbours. The easiest thing in the world, and then a huge thing. So this is one of the great places we meet in our communities, and the other place is in our workplaces. And I know we're at a low ebb in terms of working class struggle, but everyone here, and I particularly appeal to younger people here, to join a union if you're in a workplace. To join a union. Now, the WOBs are outside, and I'm a member of the Independent Workers Union myself, but join a union and try and join a union that is as democratic as possible and will listen to you and you have an input into it. That's an important part. But if you're in a workplace which has a union already, that's the union you're going to you probably have a bigger fight depending on the nature of it. But join a union, because then you're joined together in common struggle. You're not an isolated individual anymore at your workplace, a victim of your boss or their whims. The second thing I'd say, that if you're living in a community in this city, you need to be some way involved in organising in that community. And it's not always necessarily a major political issue. At the moment in Mahon, we're campaigning around getting a library for the community that's been promised for 30 years, which involves us talking to our neighbours, knocking, doing petitions, doing that kind of thing. And we're also involved now in supporting the women of Besborough who are resisting the building of an apartment block on the graves of their babies. And these are community organised things and bring us together on a common cause. And you can have differences within the campaign, politically and stuff, but we have a common cause, and that experience of working together will feed through into every campaign in the future. But I'd also say that within your communities, it's worth getting involved in cultural and sporting stuff as well, if they give people a sense of empowerment and collective organising. All these things are about building up the networks that we will rely on when there are periods of struggle like the water tax. Am I right for that?
No, you're fine.
That's all right. I'm getting indulged here. So, the final thing I'm going to say now, along this line, and I think there's an interesting debate we had around the electoral stuff and how we relate to that and stuff like that. We've had many a debate about that down the years. But I'm going to stay. This last slogan is a great slogan. It's off a wall in Belfast, and I think it was actually a Workers' Party slogan. There, I show it to Dave. It was a Workers' Party slogan, and it was a big slogan written in whitewash along a wall in Belfast in the 80s, and it was "Rise up with your class, not out of it." So in other words, we have a class. We have a common interest in improving all our lots, not just your personal lot. And under time now, when we are under relentless attack, it has been never more important that we show solidarity to each other, support each other, and organise to make things better. Thank you very much.